Hi there. So, in this vlog, I'm discussing an interesting point that I've been looking at recently in my personal day to day living, and that I've also been walking through in my process of self development and self improvement and self realization, which is the point of communication, and specifically how it is that, what I've noticed is that throughout my life personally, I never communicated much with people. And when I say communication, I specifically mean communication in relation to conflict. Like when you have an issue with a person, or when someone is upsetting you, or when you find yourself reacting to something that someone is saying, or when you are creating a certain perception of a person in your environment in your mind, and then that perception keeps on coming up. Like every time you meet the person, that perception just comes up, and it's like you are starting to develop this disliking towards this person, but you don't really know why. It just kind of built up inside of yourself because of because of that one moment that you reacted to the person, or that the person said something and you reacted in some way, and ever since that moment you just had this opinion of the person, and that opinion caused you to now kind of dislike them altogether. So that is an interesting phenomenon, and what I've realized with myself is that whenever that would happen with me, I would just, for instance, keep grudges like that my whole life, like a very long time. I would even cut people out of my life just so that I wouldn't have to have anything to do with them, just because for some reason I dislike them because of something that they said at some point and I didn't like it, and I went into a reaction, and that one moment has been haunting my relationship with that person this whole time. So, like, I would literally create this opinion of a person based on sometimes just one moment that they said something that I didn't like. And then that opinion is what I would hold in my mind as this statement of who they are, and, kind of to give give strength to the idea that I just don't like them. That's just how it is. But what I've noticed recently, when it comes to communication, is that the reason why such grudges can even exist in the first place, or the reason why you would even suddenly dislike a person and then hold on to that disliking of them for so long, is because we don't communicate. Is because whenever there's an issue coming up in relation to a person, we tend to hold on to it inside of ourselves. We tend to create opinions and judgments and ideas and perceptions of that person that we are experiencing that issue towards, instead of resolving it, instead of realizing that because our reaction to that person came up in one moment, that means that it doesn't define who that person is. It's just something happened in that moment. Something happened in my mind where a memory was triggered, or a certain thought came up in my mind, or I took something personally, or I interpreted their words and their behavior in a certain way which created a reaction inside of myself. So, that reaction that we had in relation to them doesn't actually define who they are, and yet that's actually what we tend to do in our relationships with the people around us, is that we tend to really define who these people are based on how we react to them in moments throughout our lives, which is pretty scary actually. Because if we would only communicate with each other, then we would actually, openly communicate about these points, where we share how we reacted, we share, who we are, and also kind of invite the other person to share who they are so that we can come to an understanding of, what is really going on in a situation, and so that we can come to these moments of, like aha moments where we actually suddenly realize that something, that an interpretation or a perception that we've created of their behavior or their words has been completely false all along. I mean, that's what often happens when you apply such communications. It's, and it's pretty scary that we don't communicate in that way, because, I mean, the scary part is that we do in fact create these entire ideas and beliefs and opinions of each other that is completely based on like false information. False information meaning just a reaction that came up in a moment, like thoughts that came up in your mind in one moment, memories that were triggered, all sorts of stuff that like went on in your own mind that you weren't actually necessarily aware of, that just suddenly triggered that experience of, I don't like this person. That's the scary part, that we kind of mold our relationships according to what happens inside of ourselves, our mind, and what our mind is telling us about the people around us, rather than actively maintaining and creating our relationships with the people around us through communication. Because communication, open communication about ourselves, about how we experience ourselves, how we see things, communication where what we're basically doing is cross-referencing information. Cross-referencing meaning that, you're checking whether or not what you perceived in your mind is in fact what happened. And you'll find that more often than not, in fact, your perception in your mind, your interpretation of events, doesn't correlate with what really happened in a situation. In fact, you'll find that often your opinion of a person, your perception of a person, or your interpretation of a person's behavior and words will be completely different from what was actually really going on inside of that person, once you start checking and cross-referencing your information that you have in your mind with that person. Once you start developing that communication and start actually going up to people and just sharing, like, okay, look, in that moment you said those words or you did this, and then I reacted with this experience, and I was thinking this about that, like, this is how I reacted. And once you start opening yourself up for the possibility that the way you perceive and see things might not actually be how things really are. Once you start considering the possibility of letting go of your own reactions to see more of how reality exists than what you initially perceived, through communicating with people, through open communication. Open communication meaning that you don't go and accuse a person, like, you did this and that, and that was really wrong of you, where you kind of are looking for an excuse, you're looking for a validation of how you experienced yourself. Open communication basically means that you are open to the possibility that you're not right, to the possibility that how you perceived things or how you reacted is not actually all there is not actually reality, that you might actually just have created some kind of alternate reality in your own mind. So, this is a process that I've been walking lately in my life, which is developing communication with the people around me, and specifically in moments where I react to a person, in moments where I see that I've created a certain idea of someone or a perception of that person, where suddenly, because of how I reacted in a moment, I now have a totally different kind of perception of this person. Then I am pushing myself to go up to this person, or to go up to someone else who knows this person, and to actually check with them, like, okay, I've been reacting like this, or I've been perceiving this person's behavior like that. Do you have any perspective on that, or how did you experience it? Kind of gathering information so that I can see reality more clearly. And it's been very fascinating because every time I opened up this point of communication, literally every time I had to realize that reality was completely different from how I perceived it initially. That idea or opinion or judgment or whatever it was that I was holding onto in my mind about a person was entirely my own fabrication. So therefore, communication is of great value. This sort of open communication with each other, with the people in your environment, is of utmost importance to actually make sure that you remain stable, that you remain with your both feet on the ground, that you don't start seeing or perceiving reality in a way that, is actually false, that you don't start seeing false information, but that you see things as how they really are within the multi-dimensional, way in which this reality exists. Multi-dimensional, meaning that there's a lot more going on than we might initially perceive in our own mind, in our own thoughts. So this was it for this vlog. I'll see you in the next. Thanks.